Good morning. My name is Mitch, owner and trainer at Excalibur Dog Training. This video is going to be a recap on our first lesson together. We'll be going over commands and markers, communication tools and how to use them, when to correct and when to reward your dog, changing your criteria, maintaining a universal standard, and also maintaining lasting results. To begin, when you're giving your dog a command, there are two ways of communication. You have a verbal cue or your command, and then you have a nonverbal cue, which is a hand command. These two forms of communication are to be used together to give your dog the most information as possible and set them up for success. Now we will go over those commands. Sit, down, here, place, and you'll point at the dog's place table or place bed. And there is no hand command for heel. And then the kennel will just be pointing directly at the open door of the kennel crate and say house. So those are the commands. Next, we're going to go over markers. Markers are a little bit different than commands. They don't apply to a specific behavior or task that you're asking your dog to do. They're communication tools that you can use to encourage or discourage certain behaviors though. The markers that your dog has been taught are stay, which is a bridge marker used to encourage ongoing behavior. So if your dog is in a down, use the stay to encourage that behavior to communicate to them the reward is coming, continue doing what you're doing. The next one's going to be free, which is a release marker used to break your dog from a commanded position. The next marker is going to be no, which is used to mark a correction. If your dog fails to complete a task or chooses not to complete a task, that's when that's applied. Off is to discourage unwanted behaviors, not to be confused with no. No is going to be in the context of obedience. Off is going to be anything outside of that. So jumping, couch surfing, barking, things like that. The word off would be used as a correction to discourage unwanted behaviors. Next, we'll be going over our communication tools. These are different for each dog. Whatever one your dog was sent home with is the one you'll be using that applies to them and their specific titration or sensitivity level. We look for something that is effective to create a little bit of discomfort, but not overly aversive to induce fear or anxiety in your dog. So starting from the bottom, we have the slip lead. The slip lead is exactly what it sounds like. It's a nylon lead that you put around your dog's head or around your dog's neck. It contracts on itself just like that to put it on your dog. You have it like this. You just feed this loose end through the ring. A little bit tougher. And then you get all that slack and you put it over your dog's head. You will clip your leash to the tag in here so that if you were to administer a correction, this is your dog, it contracts on itself as such. Next, we'll be going over the choke chain. Very similar to the slip lead, it's made of metal. You feed the loose end through the ring, just like that, same as you would the slip lead. And then you put this over your dog's head and you're able to contract. The difference between this and the slip lead is a lot heavier. So when you're putting it on, make sure that you have it on this way so that if your dog's on your left side, this is able to move freely in and out of that ring. If you were to do it the opposite way and you were to apply a correction, a lot of times that tension will stay and your dog is in that uncomfortable state for an extended period of time or until you adjust it. So make sure that we have it on the correct way. If you need to play around and experiment with your wrist, use that. Just make sure that we're using it to where the tension is able to release. And then finally, we'll be going over the prong collar. The prong collar is used for our more intense dogs. It has this metal plate in the center of it, or some have a buckle or a clasp. To disconnect the prong collar, all you need to do is squeeze at any point, at any link in this prong collar, these links together to disconnect it, just like that. To reconnect it, you don't want to go over your dog's head. You want to go around their neck and squeeze those two to put it back in place. Once you do have it on your dog, ensure that this chain above isn't wrapped around itself like that so that it's able to administer an effective correction if needed. Now these chains do contract on themselves as well, but there's a lot less room to work with, so it's important to make sure that it's sized correctly for your dog. Some prong collars come with a quick release clasp like this, so in the event of emergency or something that your dog's wrapped up in it, you can just release the entire collar itself by clicking that. Be careful when grabbing your prong collar to make sure you don't do that accidentally. Each tool is specific in itself and applies differently to each dog. It's important to know that the prong collar should not be left on 24/7. Those metal prongs are making constant contact with the dog's skin and can cause abrasions if left on too long or if left on when the dog's wet. The choke chain, however, is made of metal, stainless steel, so you can leave this on pretty long without any issues with rust, irritation, things like that. The slip lead tends to hold moisture if the dog gets wet, so keep that in mind. If it's tightly fitting, it could create some issues. Next, we'll be going over when to correct your dog and when to reward your dog. When you ask your dog to do a command, they have one of two choices. Either do it or don't do it. The important thing to remember is we ask our dog one time to do a command. If they complete it in a reasonable amount of time, reward them. If they do not complete it in a reasonable amount of time, that's when we implement a correction. Now remember that the correction is supposed to be implemented with the verbal cue no, as well as the physical correction itself. Once the correction has been given, ask your dog to do the same command again and give them another opportunity to make the correct decision. At which point, if they continue to not complete the commanded task, you'll deliver a correction of an increased intensity. At which point you will repeat this process. So what it will look like is if I ask your dog to sit, they don't do it, no, sit, they still don't do it, no, sit, they still don't do it, either continue going up or show them what it means. So I asked your dog to do it, okay, then I told your dog to do it, they're still not getting it, now I'm going to make your dog do it. It's also important to understand if you're asking your dog to do something that you haven't asked them to do in a very long time, they may genuinely be confused. So correcting them without any sort of context or understanding just isn't fair. So make sure they understand what you're asking them to do before you start correcting them. It's also a common mistake I see owners make when they go to correct their dog. They tend to put the verbal command into the correction. So they'll say, sit, sit, sit. A lot of times that creates a lot of confusion, and down the road, sit may become the correction if you're not careful. It sounds silly, but I would recommend practicing on your loved ones. We call these human leash drills. Putting a choke chain, prong collar, or a slip lead on your loved one's wrist or your own wrist and practicing that sequence. It develops muscle memory and can create really good habits when delivering a correction versus a command. So practice it. Sit, no, sit, no, down, no. Which brings me to my next point. Directional input when delivering a correction. Make sure that we're correcting your dog in the direction you want them to go. So if I ask them to sit, the correction will be upwards, their head will go up, their butt will go down. Versus if I ask my dog to down, they didn't do it, the correction would be no in a downward direction to show them where they're going wrong and be very, very clear to what I'm expecting of them. Now that all the negative stuff's out of the way, we can get to the fun part, or the rewarding. It's what your dog looks forward to. It's their motivation. So make sure to keep a very healthy reward schedule and that we're not always just correcting our dog. When you're rewarding your dog, there's multiple types of rewards. Whatever your dog's value is important. The thing to understand is there is a primary reward and there's a secondary reward. Your primary reward is what your dog lives for, whether that's a ball, food, you name it. Your secondary reward is going to be that reward that is still special to your dog, but not overly stimulating. I would use a secondary reward during an ongoing obedience session and save a primary reward towards the end of a very good session. Now, when you're rewarding behaviors, it's important to understand working on downstays or maintaining a commanded position, rewarding your dog in place. So if I ask my dog to place, downstay for an extended duration, and then every time I tell them to come to me to retrieve a reward, we're inadvertently creating a dog who is anticipating getting up. So it's important to go back to your dog and reward them as they're doing what you're wanting during that trial. Also, when we're talking about reward schedules, it's important to understand that when you're rewarding your dog, think about what you're encouraging. If I ask my dog to sit, I have to say no, sit repetitively, and they finally do it, and then I give them a reward. What am I encouraging? That will continue to be a repeating process because at the end of all of it, they get a reward, which is why it's important to only reward your dog when they complete the command after the first time you've asked. This is called building behaviors through reinforcement. And then finally, on the subject of rewards, if you're asking your dog to maintain a down stay or a sit stay, and I go up to my dog and I say, "Good boy, good job," and they jump up out of it, we are essentially setting our dog up for failure. So to encourage ongoing behaviors, if you want to maintain a sit stay, go up to your dog, say, "Good boy, good girl," pat him on the head, give him a treat, but make sure that we're doing it at a level that's not overly stimulating your dog to where they're going to jump up out of that commanded position. Next, we'll be going over changing our criteria. What this means is changing variables and expecting the same result. It happens a lot, taking your dog out in public and expecting them to do all these obedience commands that you practice at home because we've practiced it, right? We're in a completely new environment. This is where owners tend to get disappointed or discouraged. It's okay. It's expecting a lot out of your dog to go into a very busy building and sit and not be excited. So keep that in mind when introducing your dog to new environments. If you're going to change your criteria, it's okay to lower your standard. I'm almost finished, I promise. Next, we'll be going over maintaining a universal standard. What this basically means is ensuring that everyone in the household is on the same page. Having your guests that come over, make sure they're educated. If your dog has a habit of jumping on guests, ensure that they understand, do not encourage that. Don't invite them up to jump on you. If your dog barks, educate your guest. Tell them not to react to it. It's not aggressive. It's okay. As we all know, kids love dogs. So if you have little ones in the house, keep in mind that when we're doing training, let's make sure that we're all on the same page. This applies mostly to the little guys who like to, love up on the dogs while dad's asking so-and-so to come to me or do X, Y, and Z. It's important that we're not conflicting or confusing the dog. And then finally, we'll be going over maintaining lasting results. How do we do this? Practice. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you have to set dedicated time aside each day to practice 20, 30-minute sessions 4 times a day with your dog. The skills that your dog has learned are easily implemented into your daily routine. They're meant for it. So, implementing into daily routines. Place is going to be your best friend. You have dinner to cook, dinner to eat, laundry to do, TV to watch, whatever it is, it's a good opportunity to work on your dog's place training. If you crate your dog overnight or when you leave the house, you'll be using the house command pretty regularly as well. Sits and downs, the heel, things when you take your dog on a walk, when you're walking around the house, you can use those at any point in time. The most important thing is that you maintain a standard regardless of what you're doing. So if you have your hands loaded down with groceries and you can't correct your dog, let's not ask him to do certain things. I say that to say this: control the variables and you can control the outcome. If your dog understands that each and every time he doesn't do something, there's a consequence, you're going to build reliability in your obedience. And more importantly, you're going to develop a very deep understanding of each other's standards and a deeper connection. I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next lesson.